My name's Kathy Millett and this week we're looking at canals. Following on from a pond last week, we're on to a canal, another very flat, generally quite smooth body of water. Or is it? So here's a local canal that's just down the road from me. As you can see, the water's hardly smooth. In this part of the canal, there's a lock just to the left, and there's a weir running down. So there's a huge current, there's ripples, there's waves. Further down, where there's no movement, you do get much smoother water, and the bushes and the banks and the trees protect the surface from the wind, and that makes a huge difference. Just below the lock is this weir outflow. The water basically runs down from the lock and exits, and it creates this bubbling effect that flows across the canal. At this point here, the water's just increased in volume because of the person emptying the lock, and you can see the water flowing much more strongly. Now this is something you might see where a mill has an exit from a turbine. This is quite a simple week. You'll need a flat base for your canal. I used a foam board. Then you'll need acrylic paints to paint it, gloss varnish and gloss medium to give you some ripples. This week we're looking at techniques for flat water. Now, the easiest thing to do for flat water is to start with something flat. And I'm thinking of canals here, areas which are man-made quite often, which have big, large, smooth, very little current, no waves, quite deep. So actually you don't see through the water generally. So it doesn't matter if our canal doesn't actually have any depth to it when we model it. We just need to reflect the surface and the shine and the intensity of the mud or colouring or whatever it is that's sat in the water. So I couldn't really fit it onto any of my existing dioramas, so I've cheated a little and I've made another one. This is literally just made out of foam board. It's 3 pieces of foam board and some foam board on the banks. And just to show that I can do something other than grout, I shoved on some chamomile tea leaves. Very impressive, I know. But this is going to be here and it's going to demonstrate just what we need to do to get flat water. It's very simple, very quick. All it requires is a nice flat base. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of anything that's sticking to this base. Because if we have anything on here that's going to stick, then it will fall in the water. You'll end up with gritty water. And let's face it, water does have things suspended in it. But at scale, I doubt the rocks the size of some of these. I'm presuming this is about HO scale. It could be N, could be small, could be any scale. Again, it's just a diorama. First up, colouring the base. We need to come up with realistic colours. And in my mind, I'm thinking of my local canal, and there's a touch of raw sienna to it. Always mix way too much when I mix up. So let's try and do a bit less. It's a little bit lighter than that. And it's also a little bit browner. If this doesn't look quite right, I'll get some raw umber to put in. But so far, I've got Payne's Grey, Natural and Raw Sienna. And I'm just going to mix that up. It doesn't need to be a lot, it's only covering that base. Yeah, I think I would like a bit of the brown in there. Oh, I don't know. Okay, I think that will work. Just literally going to paint on to this with acrylic. I'm going to wait for this to dry, then I'll put another coat on just to get some depth of colour. I can see the base coat coming through here. And when it's dry, we'll get to the next stage. So my second coat is dry. I added a bit of raw umber to that mix because I just felt it was looking a little bit orangey. So next up, gloss varnish. You can use any gloss varnish. I'm going to use this acrylic one that's used for artists covering their paintings. Now the only thing I would say is if you use a solvent-based varnish, be warned, sometimes they do yellow. You're better off with an acrylic varnish that isn't going to yellow. But if you have a non-yellowing solvent that you love, any varnish will do for this stage. Literally just a case of brushing it on. Need to be careful not to leave any bubbles in there or they will show. And in reality, water doesn't generally have bubbles in it. Okay. There we go. Just trying to get rid of all those bubbles. Okay, leave that to dry. The last layer of our canal or flat body of water is gloss medium. This is just Art's acrylic gloss medium, and what I'm going to do is put it on in little ripples. We looked at canals earlier and we know exactly what kind of a ripple we're looking for. Very small, not really waves, definitely something very subtle perhaps in these smaller scales. And in this side, I'm going to pretend I've got that weir bubbling up, so I'm going to dab it on in a different pattern. We don't want this to be too thick or it won't dry. I'm doing some areas with more thinner, smaller ripples and others with wider space ripples, as if the wind has caught some areas and not others. This is the weir area and it's a lot more smooth, bobbly. It's welling up water from underneath and it's coming out. Quite hard to do, I think, successfully. So we'll put a bit of white on as well afterwards, which will really draw attention to this area. It just transitions into the smaller, normal ripples that you're seeing in the canal. Okay, I'm just going to leave this to dry. Well, I've got my ripples. To my mind, they're a little too ripply, so what I'm going to do is another layer of acrylic gloss medium, and that will enable me just to tone them down a bit by putting some ripples into the gaps. And I'm going to make sure I can see the light here, just so that I can fill some of these gaps. And the important thing is you don't build it up again on the same bits that have already been rippled. But it's just about tracing the existing high points with your brush and leaving the ripples in the gaps. And looking from it from above to make sure you're not doing funny shapes. There we go, just a few more in the areas where I felt it wasn't as, well, it was just a bit too ripply, and some smaller ones will fill in the gaps. Now, like most things, if you don't like it, you can always put another coat on. On to the final stage, a little bubbling weir area, which is around here, and it just needs a few little bits of white picked out. Very delicate, it's not huge in real life, but it is there and we need to represent it. So I'm just going to use some well shaken, top well on, some well shaken Vallejo paint, and I guess I could squeeze it onto something, but I'm going to use so little I won't. So with it to the light so I can see it, I'm just going to pick out some of these, and then I'm just going to smudge them a little, but I'm just going to pick out the highlights, and it literally is just a small amount of picking out. We're not doing a huge amount, and I am just smudging them just to tone them down a bit, really. You could use a smaller paintbrush, but here we go. It's worth looking at those pictures again to see the pattern that you want. Though at this stage, it's probably very much set by the water you've already put on there. And there we go, a small amount of white on the weir, and this is the final canal. And I'm just going to do one final coat of a product, and you don't have to do this, but I find that over time the gloss medium layer can get a little bit tacky if it's humid or damp, and basically if it gets dusty, the dust will stick to it. If that happens to you, don't worry, check out my video on how to clean dirty water. But to stop it and to help with the cleaning process, I'm just going to use some gloss varnish. And I'm just going to put a thin coat on, making sure I don't get any bubbles in there, and it will just act as a protectant layer. Now you can actually see the gloss medium layer underneath whitening up again as the water in the gloss varnish starts to affect it. That's fine, it will all dry clear eventually, but that's one of the reasons why if you're doing a lot of scenery and anything else around the area, you have to watch with gloss medium because it will go white again. It will always dry, but it's just something to be aware of. Well, that's Canals done with, and as you can see, we've now got a canal with ripples, quite fine. You could have done quite a few less if you wanted a smoother finish. You could do a few more around the weir area if you wanted a bit more bubbling. But here we go, a finished canal.
Ducks. Oh, a canal. Can I feed the ducks? Can I feed She wants Pirate Panda or Phoebe on. Well, obviously we can't put a real rabbit on, but we could, by the magic of technology, shrink them down and put them on. In the meanwhile, here's a couple of rabbits just to make Lucy feel like we put the rabbits on. Yeah, they're frolicking rabbits. They're big. It's because they're double O. You're N, you're HO. These are slightly bigger than both of you. They're quite cute and small to me. I suspect Millscale Kathy thinks they're like rats. Yeah, I know they're the wrong colour as well. Panda and Phoebe are sort of white and black, but they'll get repainted before they actually frolic properly in the grass, because, let's face it, there's no grass. Oh!
I hope you enjoyed this week's on Canals. Next week, we're on to something new. In the meanwhile, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to me on YouTube or on my website, kathymillett.co.uk. Alternatively, like me on Facebook, Kathy Millett Modelling. Hope to see you next week.